Hey guys, what's going on? It's my grandfather here today, and we're going to be talking about the New Zealand horror movie Black Sheep, which is about a bunch of zombie sheep, maybe mutant sheep, or I don't know, maybe like werewolf sheep. But they run around a farm and oh, they cause quite a ruckus. Oh, whoa! I can't believe all these sheep are going all crazy. Oh, bye. Pretty sure I came across this movie in 2006 when I was a wee little lad. It's always been in the back of my mind, but until now, I haven't watched it. So let's dive right into the plot. Oh, the plot. Oh, I love the plot. Oh, the plot, so that's where the story is. So the movie opens up on a beautiful field full of white sheep. And there's a bunch of kids and they're all like, driving around on ATVs, chasing after the sheep, being all like, we're farmers. And oh no, one of the sheep separate from the group. And the two farm boys are like, don't worry, Pa, we'll get the sheep. And then while they're getting the sheep, for some reason, there's like a pissed off boy with a leg brace staring at them, being like, they're having so much fun with sheep and I'm not allowed to have fun. And then Black Sheep, roll the credits. And then the movie opens up and that leg brace boy, he's like, screw you sheep, and he walks up to a sheep that's tied to a rope and he's got an axe in his hands and he's just like, you can't escape from peg leg now. And he murders the sheep. I don't know why. Well, I know why, because he's a bad boy. Just cuts immediately over to the other boy who's like riding home on his quad and he's like, where's my dog? And so he starts walking around and he's like, where's my dog? Scooby-Doo! Oh, where are you? And then he goes out to the barn and he's like, are you in here? Are you in here? Is that blood dropping from the ceiling? And he looks up and there's the sheep corpse hanging from the ceiling, and then all of a sudden a spooky monster runs after him and he's all like, oh, oh. It's immediately apparent that this is just his brother, I guess, in a sheep costume, because it's just like, it's obviously just a little boy making sheep noises, but he is wearing the like corpse of a sheep on its head, so like, okay, like his noise isn't very scary, but like he's wearing a fucking like freshly killed animal on his head. It's kind of spooky. And they're having lots of wacky fun, and it's ruined when the farm lady comes and she's like, boys, there's been an accident, it's your father. And the boys like look at each other like, oh no, not the papa. And a big time skip happens and it's now modern day. And what is presumed to be the blonde boy who was on the ATV is now fully grown. And he's in the back of a taxi. They're surrounded by sheep. And he is freaking out. He's like, I hate sheep. Turns out that childhood prank that his brother pulled on him wearing the corpse of a sheep, it fucked him up for life. And now he is just like, he's terrified of sheep. Apparently he's moved away from the farm since that happened and his dad died, which just correlates maybe like the two traumatic events really messed him up. But he is now finally, for the first time it seems, returning back to the farm that he grew up on. I hope there's no scary sheep in this movie. I hope nothing bad happens, because he wouldn't like it because he's scared of them. They're in the taxi and it is completely surrounded by sheep. And the taxi's like, oh, you must be from the city. And he's like, I'm from here. And he's like, oh, well, you don't look so good. You want me to open up the window? Please, roll the windows up. And he starts calling his therapist. Turns out the main reason he's going back to his childhood farm is to get over his fear of sheep. And this is what his therapist thought was the best idea. So eventually the sheep do clear and they keep driving and they pass an old rusty car and it's got a "meat is murder" bumper sticker on the back of it. And as they pass the car, it just cuts to two hippies in the bush and they're all like, we're hippies. Oh, let's sneak onto this farm. And they're crawling over like a barbed wire fence. And then all of a sudden, modern technology appears on the horizon. And it's an airplane. And they're like, oh, and they hide in the bushes as the plane flies over them. And the plane lands and hops out. And it turns out like that's the brother on the farm, like the other brother, who turns out is the leg brace kid. So like, oh, watch out. Oh, watch out. So the blonde guy, he arrives in the cab and like he goes into the house and he's like, brother, where are you? And there's a bunch of spooky sheep heads on the wall. And then he's exploring the house when the old lady who broke the news to them walks up behind him and loads like a shotgun to the back of his head. And he's like, who are you? And he's like, I'm me. And she's like, oh, it's you. I've never really actually caught the guy's name in this movie. He's just, from now on, he's just the blonde brother. But she's like, oh, it's you. It's blonde brother. And she doesn't blow his brains out. And he's like, where's my brother? And she's like, oh, he's out in the yard. And he's preparing for a big speech he's going to perform. So the blonde brother walks out in the yard and his brother's like, what are you doing here? You haven't been back since the accident and you hate sheep. And he's like, oh, my therapist told me to come here. And he's like, oh, okay. Well, how about I give you money for your share of the farm and you could just leave. And he's like, yeah, okay, that sounds pretty good. So they go to the house and he signs him a big check. While this is going on, it cuts to the two hippies who are just like spying through a fence and they're like, oh, there's an evil laboratory down there. That must be where the bad meat people are. And we gotta put a stop to this. And like these scientists exit a lab that's just in the middle of the farm. And the one hippie guy's like, I can't take this anymore. And he runs down the hill and he runs right like 5 feet away from the scientists and he just starts trying to steal their cooler. But it's too heavy for him, so he's and he puts it down and he takes just one vial out and he starts leaving. And then the scientists who are 5 feet away from him are like, wait a second, that guy's stealing our stuff. And then they chase after him up the hill and they run into the forest. There's a funny line here where like the hippie, they're like in the forest and they're like, don't worry, babe, they're meat eaters, they'll never catch us. I like that. Touche hippies, you made me chortle. Turns out like the scientists are here on the farm because they're making GMO meat or like genetically modified super sheep that are just going to, oh, they're going to be tasty. They're going to be nice and white and like their wool is going to be, oh, it's so fluffy, and they're going to be perfect farm animal. And that's why the scientists are here, and the hippies who have the vial are going to expose them because they have like a weird sheep fetus in the vial. Oh, and the cooler from before was like meant for disposal, so like they shouldn't have this, but they're gonna take this back to their like hippie colony. But like, the circle of life. They're gonna be like, those monsters, what have they done to the sheep? And well, they're sitting there and would you believe this? The evil scientists enter nature's sanctuary and they start walking through the bushes. And the hippie guy's like, oh, I didn't plan for this. And he gets scared and he runs off. And as he's running, and he trips and he falls. And the sheep vial fetus splashes on the ground and like shatters. And he's just like looking at it and it's like oozing. But he doesn't realize the sheep fetus is on his back. And it's like, crawls up and bites him in the ear, and he starts screaming. And he starts like slamming against a tree and stuff, taking like a tree branch to beat this thing off of his ear. And finally, he just like grabs it and he like, rips it off. And he's screaming the whole time, but nobody can hear him because he's at least 50 feet into the forest. But anyways, like he throws the fetus off and he's like, get away from me. While this is going on, it cuts back to the two brothers and they're like talking about stuff. And it turns out the brother's been running the farm since the father died. and he runs it his own way. He isn't running the same way Papa ran it. He's got cool new ideas. The other brother's like, "Oh, why don't you run it like Papa does?" And he's like, "Because it's the future. We can't just be shoving our hands up sheep's butts," which I guess they do. While they're like arguing about farm ethics, and while this is going on, the zombie fetus is like crawling across the field, and then it gets to like the top of the hill, and it's like, meh, meh. And the other sheep are like, what is that? Is that a zombie sheep fetus? They go to investigate, and they find the zombie fetus, and they're like, and it's like, and it bites one of them on the nose, and it's like, "Oh, you fucking dick," and it just runs off. And then the like hippie chick's like wandering around. She's like, "Where's my boyfriend? I can't find my boyfriend. Where's my boyfriend?" And she's just wandering the fields now aimlessly, like, "Where's my boyfriend? He has the last of my soybeans." At this point, the blonde brother, like, he meets the farmhand, who turns out he's the like other boy. So the start of the movie, I had to like look back at this to like fully understand. There's the two boys who are on the quads, and then the blonde boy is one of them, and the farmhand's the other one, and they're the ones who round up the sheep at the start of the movie. And the like psycho leg brace kid is the like brother who runs the farm now. So anyways, he meets his childhood farmhand, and they go up into the fields to like face his fears and see sheep. So they're like driving along, and then like they come across the sheep that was bitten on the nose, and it's just like in the middle of the road like a sheep would be. And the farmhand's like, "Oi, this is a great time to see some sheep." And the blonde brother's like, and he's like trying to find his therapist, and the farmhand goes out and he's like, "Oh, help me throw this sheep over the fence." And he like picks up the sheep from behind, and he's like dragging, and he's like, "Come on, brother, help me throw the sheep over the fence." And they don't notice the hippie chick snuck up, and she grabs the gun from the truck, and she's like, "Oh yeah, where's me brother? Or where's me boyfriend?" And they're like, "Who's your boyfriend here? Who are you, lady?" And she's like, "It doesn't matter." And she holds them at gunpoint, and they start looking for her boyfriend. And they're like walking through the forest, and they're talking, and he reveals that he's the brother of the guy who runs the farm, the evil farmer. He's the brother of the evil farmer. And she points the gun at him. He's like, "Yes, I can tell by your aura, you're a bad boy." And the farmhand's like, "Lady, if you're gonna shoot him, you gotta switch the safety off, okay?" And she's like, "I don't deal with guns. I'm a hippie. I don't know what this is." And he's like, "Oh, it's right there on the side." And she's like, "Eh?" And he's like, "Oh, I'll show you." And then she's like, "Okay, here's the gun." And he's like, "Yeah, it's right here." And he goes like, "Here you go, lady. You can have your gun back." She's like, "Oh, you're so sweet." And he's like, "Yeah, right." And he points the gun at her, and he's like, we're gonna go now." And she's like, "Ah, you fooled me, farmman." And then they start going back to like their Jeep, and she's like, "Well, hey guys, I know I just like threatened to shoot you and stuff, but can you drive me back to my vehicle? I don't know where my boyfriend is, and I don't know where I parked." And they're like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" So they're about to hop in the truck, and the hippie chick reveals to them that her name's Experience. And their conversation is suddenly interrupted by smoke on the horizon. And the farmhand's like, "Oh, there's smoke over there. Let's go investigate." So they drive over there, and they hop out of the truck, and like farmhand's like, "I'm gonna bring my gun to shoot the fire." So they run into this house, and turns out there's just smoke from a pot of spaghetti and like sausages that's burning on the stove. And they're like, "Oh, that's kind of weird." And they turn off the stove, and they're like, "Oh, I wonder where the farmer who lives in this house, who clearly must be here because he was just cooking spaghetti and sausages." So they start searching the house, and a sheep appears, and they're like, "Is that a sheep on the sheep farm? What's he doing inside here?" And then the sheep's like, runs at them, like, oh, Jesus Christ. And they run and they barricade themselves inside of a room, and they're like, that sheep's kind of acting a little funny. And they find the farmer who's just like, his like throat's been ripped out and stuff, and he's like laying behind the bed, and they're like, oh man, this is maybe not a normal sheep. And it punches its head through the door, and they're like, oh, shoot it. And he's like, shoots the sheep in the head, and they're like, oh, that was a close one. So they go to like look at the sheep, and it jumps up again. He shoots it again in the head. This time it's dead. So they go to like leave, and there's a bunch of sheep now outside the house, and they're all like, oh, that's a lot of sheep. And they hop inside, but they're all like normal sheep. They're all just like, meh, we're sheep on a sheep farm. So they hop in the truck, and like the farmhand's in the front, and the blonde guy and the hippie chick's in the back, and they're about to go. Like the farmhand looks over, he's like, oh, there's a sheep in here. And then the sheep's trying to attack him, and he's like punching the sheep, but he also like just starts flooring the Jeep. So they're just like taking off down the farm field, and he's like fist fighting. He's like slamming it against the like steering wheel, and the sheep's like, meh, meh. And then he's like, this is too much for me. So he's like, I'm leaving. So he climbs out of the back, and he's in the back with the other ones. And the hippie chick's like, if you're back here, who's driving the Jeep? And it's one of my favorite parts of the movie. It cuts to the sheep, and the sheep's behind the steering wheel, and they're just going, and it drives up a big hill, and then it starts heading towards a cliff, and they're all like, oh, there's a cliff coming. And they all bail out, and the Jeep like, and it launches off of the cliff. And it is the best shot of the movie, where like this Jeep's flying through the air, and it's just the Jeep behind the steering wheel, and it's like, it just smashes in the ground and like crumples up. I put that on replay, and I watched that a couple of times. It's so good. This just sheep behind the steering wheel. And all it is just, yeah. Oh, it sounds perfect. It's just launches, and all you hear is the sheep going, bah! It smashes to the ground. It is peak. It is the peak of this movie. So they're like looking down at like their crashed vehicle at the bottom of the cliff, and like the farmhand's like, oh bugger. And like the blonde guy's like, this is the exact specific cliff where my father died. And like out of all the cliffs to drive a sheep Jeep off of, this is the one the sheep chose. So like he was like, this is where my father fell. Experience is just like, oh, sorry. They're like, oh, don't worry about that. We have to go warn everybody about the sheep. So then they're like, but we don't have a vehicle. It's gonna be a long walk. So then they just start walking casually back to the farm. And it cuts back to the scientists who are finally arriving back from the woods after searching for the hippie guy. And they're like, oh, we couldn't find him. And there's like a lady scientist, and she's like, don't worry, it's kind of whatever. Anyways, we still have 2 more, so we should dispose of this properly. So they give it to the one guy, and he's like just walking out into the field, and there's just a big hole there that says like, don't go into here, dogs. And they're like, okay. And they just throw it down the hole, and the guy's like, oh, it was a good job I did today. And he's walking back, and then he just murdered my sheep, and tackled by a bunch of sheep, and he's dead. He never makes it back. While the scientist is getting murdered by the sheep, the like evil farmer is driving down the road on the farm, and like the hippie guy is walking in front of him, and he's like on the road, and the evil farmer's like, and the guy's like acting like a sheep. He's like, oh, there's a vehicle and it's honking at him. He's like, get off the road. And then he hops out, and they like start talking to each other, and he's like, you're a hippie. And he's like, you're an evil farmer. And the hippie like bites him on the hand, and then he's like, ah, you bit me. Get away, hippie. And the hippie's like, man, and he just scurries off, and he's like, oh, it's not every day you get bitten by a hippie. And he just climbs back into the car and just starts driving back. So then it cuts back to the 3 amigos who are walking across the field, and like the farmhand's like, oh, my foot kind of hurts. And he's like, oh, I did get bitten by the sheep. So he like pulls his boot off and there's just a sheep's hoof where his foot should be. And he's like, oh, I might need to go get a tetanus shot for this one. But then a bunch of sheep start coming and they're like, oh, we should get out of here. This is a bad situation. So they start running and they find the laboratory. So they go inside the laboratory and they're in there. And then the scientists are like, hey, what are you guys doing in here? As they're like looking at all the like weird sheep experiments. The evil brother's there too. So it's the scientist, the evil brother, and then the three amigos. They're like, what's going on here, brother? It seems like you're doing evil farming stuff. And the brother's like, oh, you wouldn't understand. You're afraid of sheep. And then the one scientist injects a giant vial, like a comically large vial, into the farmhand's neck, and he falls to the ground. And he's like, go without me, please. It's all like traumatic, and he's like, just go on without me. It's not safe for you here anymore. He's like he's about to be a werewolf transforming. He's like, get out of here, please. It's not safe here. So they go to leave, and the evil farmer's like, not so fast. And he points a gun at the blonde brother, and he's like, you're not allowed to leave. And the blonde brother's like, and he just leaves anyways. So they go outside and the sheep are still there. So they walk out of the laboratory and they're like running, and they're like, where do we go now? And they see the giant hole from earlier, and they're like, let's go into the big hole that's in the field. That'll be our sanctuary from the sheep. And they go up to the hole and they're like, wait a second. Oh, there's a bunch of sheep guts down there. And they're like, I don't want to go down the sheep hole. And they're like standing there, and like the sheep are like trying to get through the fence. And the brother comes out and he's like, hey, I told you you should have just took the money and left. And they like argue for a bit, and like he's like, take the money. I'm not selling you my portion of the farm. And the brother's like, well, sometimes accidents happen. And then the blonde brother starts slipping into the hole, and he's like, evil brother, save me. And would you believe this? The evil brother's like, not gonna happen, buddy. And he just turns away and starts walking away. And then the blonde guy grabs the like hippie chick and pulls her down into the hole with them, so they like fall down in a bunch of goop. But thank God, this hole is connected to a cave system. So she lights a nice pink or purple candle, and she's like, this will help with the like smell. So they start exploring the cave, trying to find a way out through candlelight. And an evil sheep comes after them at some point, and they're like crawling through the cave, and they finally like escape through a little hole in the cave, and she throws the candle on top of the sheep, who just bursts into flames. While they're down in the hole, the like evil brother's at home, and he's like trying to prepare for like the speech, and while he's talking, he keeps like bang, because he too is transforming into a sheep. So he's like, those bastards. And
my money, little bastard.
It's kind of funny. I don't know, it's kind of funny. So Experience and the blonde brother find like an old barn, so they go to run and hide in there, and they hear shearing noises, and they're like, what's that? Is that somebody getting sheared? So they go in, and there's a giant mutant sheep, and it's like shearing itself, and they're like, oh. And then like turns out it's the hippie guy who's like fully transformed into a were-sheep now, and they have an epic battle, and they're like running from the like evil sheep in the barn. And then like at one point they get cornered, and like the blonde chick's like, you've been eating meat, haven't you? The evil mutant sheep's like, no, I promise I haven't been eating. Like it befuddles the evil mutant sheep, and he's like, I haven't been eating meat. I wouldn't do that. She's like, you've been eating meat. And it wasn't even organic, was it? And like this is enough of a distraction to like escape from the like evil sheep mutant. And they're able to escape, which is, that's good for them. And then the brothers, like all the investors show up for this presentation. So the brother's like in the field, and he's like giving the presentation. He's all like, and he looks all sweaty and stuff. And he's got like the prize sheep in like a box beside him. So he's trying to talk, and this thing just keeps like, meh, meh, and he's like getting frustrated with it because it's interrupting his perfect speech. And he finally like reveals it too, and there's all like the investors there. There's like a group of like Japanese investors, like, oh, like it keeps bang, and then like the blonde brother and the hippie chick are like looking at it, and there's just a giant horde of sheep coming towards like the bang, and then like everybody dies at the presentation. They just all get nuked by these sheep. Some of the kills are actually pretty sweet. They do it multiple times in the movie, but I love when it's just a guy standing there and it's just like a sheep that takes them out. So then they're like experienced and the blonde guy are running, and then they find the old lady who's like in a car, and they're just like, she's like, get in, and they hop in and they start driving, and they're like viewing all the carnage from the sheep fighting everything, and they're like hitting sheep on the way. And then they arrive at the house, and then the hippie sheep mutants there too, and they have like a fight in the kitchen, and Experience defeats the sheep monster by jamming a chopstick in like the back of the neck. And they're like, did you kill him? And she's like, no, I used an acupuncture point on his neck, which perfectly paralyzes him humanely, but it doesn't kill him. And they're like, oh wow, hippie magic is real. And then they search through the house and they find like the evil brother who ran from the presentation. He's just like wearing a shirt and he's like in his underpants. And the blonde brother's like, you're a bad boy. And he's like, I'm not a bad boy, I'm a farmer. And they like argue about it a little bit. And then the blonde brother like points the gun at the like prize sheep, and he's like goes to shoot it, and like the evil brother hops in front of him. He's like, no, don't shoot it, it's family. And he's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, I made this sheep with my balls, basically. Like, basically implying that they used his like sperm to like crossbreed with the sheep and make a nice white sheep, is what that turned into being. So like, I don't know. He's like, don't shoot the sheep, it's my blood, which he was also like fucking it like 5 minutes ago. So like, that's like his half, it's like his kid, but it's a sheep. So like there's a lot of levels. Like, this guy's evil, okay? You don't understand. He's not a good guy. If that's not clear at this point, he's a bad farmer. And then like they're like arguing about the ethics of like farming and stuff, and then like the sheep start smashing their heads through the wall, and they're like, oh my god, we're surrounded by sheep, we gotta get out of here, we gotta go, evil brother. And the evil brother's like, and he's got like a hoof hand out, and he's like, I don't got anything to worry about, buddy, you guys are the ones in danger here. They go to like leave, and they're like surrounded, like the whole house is surrounded by sheep, and they watch the evil brother like just walk through the crowd of the sheep, and he goes to like the barn, and they're like, oh shit, maybe we shouldn't have let him go, he's gonna spread this virus to the rest of the world, or at least New Zealand. And so like the blonde brother's like, he just reveals that he's also been bitten at some point. They never like, it just, he's been bitten now too, and he's like, it's too late for me, I'll go, I got a score to settle with my brother. And they're like, are you sure? And he's like, yeah, I gotta go do this. And they're like, but there's sheep here. And he's like, I'll just have to use the art of disguise. The old lady's got a bunch of sheep like seat covers in her car, so he like puts those on, and he starts like crawling through the horde of the sheep, and they're all like, meh. And he's like, I'm just a good sheep here too, don't worry about me. But his disguise works a little too good, and there's a sheep, and it hops on top of him, and he starts like humping him from behind. He's like, no, stop, sheep, stop it, this is ridiculous, I'm not an actual sheep. And like he's like trying to get the sheep off, and then he uses his dad's golden shearing trophy that he won, and he just jabs the sheep in the dick, and the sheep's like, and it runs off, and like his clever disguise is ruined. But then he like looks around, and all the sheep are just like, and he's like, oh, they must think I'm one of them now too because of my hand. So like he's like, okay, and he just like goes, and like the brother has started the plane up, and he's like in the barn too, and he starts like transforming, and there's like a cool transition of like his nose going out, and it looks very like werewolf movie-esque. And then they start like fighting in the barn, and they like flow out into like the field here, where like the plane that was turned on, it just starts like moving on its own. At first I was like, is there a sheep driving that thing? But no, it's just going around in like a circle in the farm field. So they're like fighting, and the like iconic sheepdog that I haven't really mentioned, it was like kind of around, but like the sheepdog that I've been talking about a whole lot, that appears and he's like yelling herding commands at the like dog, and the dog's like bark, bark, bark. And like the evil brother, who's now a sheep, panics because it's like a sheep, and like he's more sheep than man now, so he completely freezes, and then the plane comes up behind him and like strikes him with the propeller, and he gets all like chopped up, and they're all like, oh, you did it, doggy. Like, they're like, oh, I'm glad that's over with. But then like he's not actually dead, so he like jumps back up and he's like meh. So then like the farmhand shows up and he like jams this like pesticide sprayer into like the sheep's mouth, and like and sprays like prime energy drink into the sheep's mouth, and it's like and then it falls to the ground like it's dead. And then like the blonde guy's like, oh my god, thank you for saving me, farmhand. And he jams the nozzle into his mouth and like sprays juice into his mouth, and then like he's like and he's like transforming or he's like de-transforming, and then he's like fine. He's like, oh, thank you, farmhand. And the farmhand's like, yeah, I found this cure in the laboratory, that's convenient, huh? And they look down at the evil brother, who's like now back to human, but he's all like mangled up, and they're like, oh no, the evil brother's dead, womp womp. So then they're like, oh, we should cure all the other sheep. And they find all the sheep, and they're just farting uncontrollably now. They're just like, it's fart noise, fart noise, fart noise. They're like, oh, these sheep are now farting. The like farmhand's got the nozzle, and he's like, I don't got enough of this stuff to cure all of them sheep. And they're like, what do we do now? And then suddenly the evil brother's there again, and he's like, I gotta be with my sheep. And he like walks forward towards the sheep, and then he's like, I'm gonna be one with the sheep. And then a sheep comes and bites his dick off, and he's like, oh, it's so funny when it like grabs his pee and it bites it. Like, I laughed so hard. And then like the sheep devour them, and like the like blonde brother and farmhand are like looking at all the sheep, and like, ugh, these farting sheep, they ate my brother and they're evil, and we don't have enough antidote. What do we do? And he turns and he's like, methane. And they throw a lighter onto the farting sheep, and they explode. Just like a gigantic explosion of farts, and like I love fart humor. And it blows up and like destroys the whole barn, and then they're like, oh, good job. And then it time skips to the next day, and they're like rounded up all the like guests from the presentation earlier, and they like sprayed all the stuff in their mouths, so they're all like people again, and it's all like a happy ending. Experience is now his like girlfriend, and they're like, oh, maybe we should start like organic farming now. And he's like, yeah, I think that'd be a good idea. I think that's way better than creating like a zombie virus. And they're like, oh yeah, we could have compostable toilets. And they're all happy and stuff, and like the blonde brother now no longer has a fear of sheep, and like it's all happy and stuff. And then it like pans up to just the sheepdog on the hill overlooking everything, and then it's just like meh. And that's how the movie ends, like, oh, maybe the sheepdog's more sheep than dog. And then yeah, that's the end. Roll credits, black sheep. So let's talk about some of the pros and cons for this. Like, what I liked about this movie was like it seemed to have like the perfect budget. Like it had practical effects, and the makeup on the sheep was like really well done, but it wasn't like, well, why'd they have this big of a budget? It was like perfect amount. Like there wasn't anything I felt like they really compromised on. There wasn't any like gross green screen backgrounds or anything. Overall, it was well done. There were some like genuinely funny moments in this. Like I still love that sheep off the cliff. And there was a couple little like subtle jokes and like one-liners that were said that if you blinked you would miss. But there was a couple like, okay, that made me and I did appreciate like this was definitely supposed to be like a comedy horror movie, but it wasn't like, oh my god, like nobody turned to the camera and been like, wow, this is wacky, there's a bunch of sheep here, huh? There were some like poor jokes in this one too. Like the evil farmer is like, there's a couple times in the movie where they're like, he's evil because he fucks the sheep as well as try to make them like mutant, like the perfect sheep. It's kind of confusing too, because like he presents this like beautiful like white sheep that's supposed to be like but it's not really like clear where the like mutant sheep come from. I guess it's like a byproduct of him shagging the sheep to make the perfect sheep. I also didn't really like the ending. I felt like the ending was a little rushed. Like the movie actually has like some stuff throughout it where it's like, oh, okay, this was like left here to be in the future, like to be relevant in the future, which is always nice. But the ending's just like very like, and then this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and it's just all like happy coincidences. Like the plane just happens to be roaming around in a circle, and like the sheep who weren't farting at any point until the very end scene are now farting, and that's how they like resolve the whole conflict in the movie, is by blowing up the farting sheep. I didn't really like that. So now it's the score time. Ooh, the score time. Overall, I felt this movie wasn't bad. It wasn't great. Didn't do anything to really like reinvent the wheel. It never had a moment where I was like, oh, that's really cool. It just does everything well, but it also feels very like safe. It doesn't try to expand on it. It knew what it was, and it never tried to be anything other than that. So like that's fine. None of the acting in the movie was like spectacular, but it was also like there wasn't any like low points in the movie where it was like, oh, you could have recasted that. There was no acting that like stood out for me, so that's probably a positive in general. Now, I kind of like the movie. I don't regret watching it for sure, but I don't think I would really recommend this to anybody. There are like some moments, but like overall, like, if you see movies like this, you've seen this movie before, and there isn't anything like here that's gonna really make me remember the movie. Like it is gonna be that movie with mutant sheep in it, but over other than the sheep launching off the cliff, there's nothing here for me to like lock into my brain, really. It is very like middle of the road, and that's okay, but I don't think I would like recommend it to you. Not even like, it's not scary, and it's not goofy enough for you to really want to watch with all your friends and be like, oh, look at these silly sheep, what are they doing now? So I'm gonna give Black Sheep a 4.7 out of 10, which I feel like that's a very good score. And yeah, it's exactly where I was thinking. Like I think, yeah, it's probably slightly below. It's not bad by any means. It's perfectly fine, but it's just very like, it's like eating cereal for breakfast. Like you do that, and like if you just want something to like be a horror movie, it is that, but it's not gonna spice up your day by any means. This, however, puts Black Sheep at the #1 spot of my global ranking. I'm gonna do like a global ranking, so like every movie I review will be thrown into this, and it'll compete to be #1. I think that's kind of fun, especially in the future. I do want to make it so like people can find cool movies by watching it. I do hope they watch the full review and not just go like, this is #1, it's gotta be. There are like little things, like obviously some people are gonna want like that so bad it's good horror movie, and other people are gonna want genuinely like scary movies. So hopefully if you watch enough of my videos, you kind of see where I'm coming from, and like if your tastes align with me, then like the list should be very similar to you. But right now this is at the #1 spot. So put your crown on, Mr. Black Sheep, and enjoy your #1 spot for sure, because I don't think it's gonna last forever. Well, I hope you enjoyed this deep dive review into Black Sheep. I really love weird horror movies and like goofy horror movies. So if you liked it, or if there's any movies you would suggest, please leave a comment below and I'll be happy to read them. But overall, this has been my review of Black Sheep. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.